Welcome everybody to the York Festival of Ideas and to York St John. This workshop is about autism and employment. It's entitled Ready, Willing and Able, which is actually a programme which runs in Canada, specifically for autistic people, supporting them into employment. My name's Jonathan Vincent. I'm a lecturer here in the School of Education, and I'll be sort of leading the first part, if you like. But we've got a range of other people who are also involved. We are part of a group called Pro Autism, which was established in about 2017, and it's made up of autistic and non-autistic people together, with a kind of vision of trying to achieve some change and cultural change, particularly in industries, and working with communities and employers to think about how they could make workplaces and recruitment processes more autism inclusive, in order that they could make use and recruit some of the best talent which really exists today, which so far really isn't being recruited and not being tapped. As I said, my name's Jonathan Vincent. I'll just get the other people who are going to be contributing today. Some of them are part of our group for autism, some not. But I'll just, do you want to say hello?
Hi everyone, my name is Emily Collins. I work as a job coach for a charity called Humanity Response. So I support employers to hire a diverse workforce, and I also support autistic individuals into work or back into work.
Ronnie, do you want to?
Hi, I'm Ronnie Pinder. I have two jobs. The more interesting one is an autistic speaker, so I speak at conferences and events around the country. The other one is I also work part-time locally in New York in a supermarket for specific reasons we can't explain that.
I'm David Atkinson, part-time lecturer here, assessed as autistic only 2 months ago. So I'm on a good learning curve trying to work out who I was and who I will be in the future. And I'm quite enjoying the journey.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm currently out of work. I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome at age 40.
Great, thank you. So the format of this session is going to be sort of 2 parts. The first bit is going to be a bit more of an interactive workshop, some activities. You're going to be working together, doing some different stuff, so it's not going to be just me talking at you or one person talking at you, with a particular kind of aim of trying to understand a bit more about autism and neurodivergence generally, and some of the differences, but also some of the potential strengths. Then we'll have a bit of a break, see if there's any coffee or cake left. And then the second part is going to be a panel discussion, and so Ronnie, David and Andrew are going to be part of that, and Emily is going to chair that panel discussion. So that's an opportunity to, I guess, learn from autistic people from their own experiences, which is much more valuable than someone who's not autistic telling you about it. And that will run in terms of, there'll be some questions, but at the end there'll be an opportunity for you to ask them any questions that you might have. So that's the format, if we're happy with that. Just to get us started and talking to each other a little bit, on your tables you should have something that looks like this. I want you to just have a go. Not everybody necessarily will be in work, I guess, but you can put yourself in the position of what helps you be successful in terms of different ways of working, whether that's employment or otherwise. And you simply have to sort of work out, 1 makes it more difficult, it was a barrier to success, and 10 actively helps me do it. So have a go doing it yourself. I've not brought any pens.
I have.
Oh, good. See, somebody needs to be organised. And then we can have a discussion afterwards. But have a go. It'll take you about a minute or so. A bowl of pens. No leg. Wow. So once you finish, you'll probably end up with something that kind of looks a bit like a star or whatever. You can kind of join the lines up. Oh, Maureen.
Moving like juggling multiple projects at once, it's not very effective. I don't think I could not do multiple projects at once. Yeah.
So join your lines up and then have a conversation with someone beside you. Is it similar? Is it different? What are the things that are barriers to you that might be make someone else successful or whatever? Have a little look. What do you reckon?
Yeah, like, yeah. But I'm thinking like, actually, to get it done. Yeah, but look, but the 365 girls. No, but all I'm saying is it's a bit of yeah. I mean, I think it's
Okay, so the point of this activity is that it's got nothing to do with autism. The point of this is that you'll probably recognize that sitting at your table or talking to someone beside you, that everybody works in different ways, that the things that make you successful or might be barriers to your success will be different depending on who you are, maybe dependent on where you work or the kind of work that you do. It's going to be different. Everybody is different. So whilst today or this evening we're kind of talking about autism, it's important to, I guess, underpin that with the fact that everybody is different, including every autistic person is going to be different as well. So the things that make you successful in a particular context will be different. And I guess that's kind of the fundamental idea that I want to start with. I think it's useful probably just to have something of a definition to get us going in a sense. The National Autistic Society have, I guess, what is not a bad definition to begin with. So autism is a lifelong developmental condition that affects how a person communicates with and relates to other people and how they experience the world around them. I think it's a good starting point. Yep.
Can I ask a question? Somebody mentioned Asperger's, and there is a difference of view on use. Would you like to just feel free to tell us so how you want to tackle it?
Well, what we'll do is, I think we'll come to that in a second, right now, in fact. Yeah.
My very boring, mundane question is, how do you feel about people taking photographs of your slide?
Oh, good, knock yourself out. Yes, please do. I should say more straightforwardly. So this is a starting point. I would say it's not necessarily the best definition in the world, but it's probably good just to get people understanding what we're talking about. And I think the lifelong aspect is important as well. It's not something which is just related to children. This is something which all people, I mean, David was just saying he was only diagnosed 2 months ago, but he's been autistic his whole life. It's not only happened in 2, so it is a lifelong developmental condition. Will Mandy, who is one of the editors on a journal called Autism, says there's not one single autism, but rather there are hundreds or even thousands of autisms. That idea of every person being different, every way that autism is experienced and lived is different. So I'm couching is sort of like trying to define things, but in a way that we need to be open-minded about the fact that it's different really for everyone. Steve Shore, another autistic advocate, would say, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. That's it. Everyone is different in that sense. I think this speaks to the same idea. You were asking about the idea of a kind of an Asperger's diagnosis or autism. As I said, it's a developmental condition, but it is also considered to be a spectrum condition. And so since the 1980s, the early 80s, I guess that's been helpful for people understanding that we could plot people based on their level of functioning, what they can do or how complex their needs might be, I guess. And that's tended to lead to an understanding of a person being high functioning, which an Asperger's diagnosis would fall into, or low functioning perhaps. That's also tended to lead to people be thinking about individuals being very autistic or not very autistic, which is probably really not that helpful. And this is something which I think people are increasingly moving away from, because it doesn't really help us. It's quite it's too monolithic. It treats people like I can just go, well, that's you're there. You're not very autistic and you're quite high functioning, so you must be fine. So when it comes to employment, for example, well, you should be able to get a job because you're high functioning. My research is with university students on the spectrum leaving university. Some of them have, all of them have degrees, masters, PhDs. So they're very high functioning, but they do not find it easy to get a job. So it isn't to say that they're not very autistic or things that are not difficult for them. So thinking about an autism spectrum in a different way might be around thinking about it as a kind of a spectrum, a color spectrum, rather than some sort of linear spectrum. Autistic, very autistic, not very autistic. That's not that helpful. In fact, we could think about the different things that make up an autism diagnosis, which might be around communication needs. It could be around how we perceive others and engage with other people, abilities to intuit what somebody thinks or is going to do, perhaps, detail over big pictures, social understandings, whatever it might be. It might be more useful to think of a color spectrum like this, and in fact, a person might plot, if you like, might have strengths or difficulties across all of these different things. So they might find something very difficult, but something else not that difficult. And so it becomes a bit more dynamic, it becomes a bit more personal, just in the same way that your profile is a bit spiky, like this, so is this person's. And in fact, it might be the case that this person's profile looks like this in one context, on one day, but might look entirely different in a different place on a different day. If you take, a workplace, a busy kind of canteen type place where there's lots of noise, lots of stuff happening, that might be really challenging compared to a quiet office where I'm by myself and I'm in control. So it depends. So thinking about an autism diagnosis in a much more dynamic and person-centered way, I think is quite useful. Does that make sense so far? Yeah. So what I want to do is to pick out a few kind of key things that might be potentially differences, but also maybe strengths or challenges depending on the context. Francesca Happe and Uda Frith sort of developed an idea of thinking about autism as a different cognitive style. They're both psychologists. But rather than thinking about in terms of deficits and disorders and problems that ought or need to be changed or cured, thinking about it in terms of just the way the brain is wired being different. And that fits into a wider kind of neurodiversity way of thinking about autism. That it isn't to say it's not there, it's made up, it's socially constructed. It's to say, no. There are neurological differences, they exist, but they're not necessarily deficits. They're not necessarily bad. We could see them as strengths. We could, depending on the context, they could be very helpful. Yeah.
So I don't mean to stop you for 5 minutes.
No, go ahead.
If we go back to the previous slide, the spectrum, the color spectrum.
Yeah.
Still, I mean, hopefully ask a question about it later on, but still, there seems to be this idea that when we do this slide, most of the time people say, could we go back to it just for a second? Sorry. Yeah, things like the perception of others, sensory filter, communication skills, motor skills. It seems that most people would understand that in terms of, at the very outside of that's 100%, you've got bad perception of others, bad communication skills, bad motor skills. And so this autism spectrum still seems to assume a positive negative slant on the idea of autism. And then we go and say, but it's not necessarily negative. And yet when we plot people or ourselves on this spectrum, we are by necessity plotting something negative. So how do we merge those two together?
Well, I guess it depends, maybe on the context, it depends. So if we take something like detail over big picture, so that could be what, in psychology, they talk about weak central coherence, so kind of a lack of holistic thinking about something. But as we'll see, sort of as we go through, depending on the context, that could be a skill. So you're right, it tends still probably within kind of medical discourse to move toward a kind of being problems with X, Y, and Z. But I suppose I'm interested in thinking about how that might be seen differently, and that's a whole range of other people who are involved in that as well. And I mean, if there's anything you want to add about that, any?
I've been trying to do some work on this myself, but I've only just come to it fairly recently. But I personally kind of like the circular scale of things. It's multiple dimensions. If you take 360 degrees as being a whole load of dimensions within that, they're all polar dimensions. It's not a question of positive and negative. It's at one end of that dimension and another end of that dimension. The individual person is therefore represented by the area covered by their profile. And everybody's going to have a different area. Those with, if you put certain dimensions at one end of the scale, you could say that the person in the middle, it might be that perfect individual if you were looking at the dimensions in that respect. But if you cover the whole area, you might need all the support that the world can give you. In between those two poles, you've got an awful lot, a range of potential difference. Whether you call it autism, Asperger's, ADHD, all the other dyslexia, all the rest of that in there, and neurotypical, we're all in that spectrum. And that's a personal view, and I've not written it up yet.
Ronnie, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I think Jonathan hit it on the head with one word, that's different. Because the problem is when people look at negative and positive all the time, they're looking at it 9 times out of 10 from a neurotypical point of view, so a non-autistic point of view. So they're going to see the negative over the positive 9 times out of 10. And the problem is that the world isn't built for autistic people, it's built for neurotypical people. If it was built for autistic people, you wouldn't see the negatives, you would see the positives. And it depends how you approach it and how things are altered and changed, which is the problem that we face. If things are altered and changed and adapted to help autistic people, the balance is going to change. It's always looked at from through neurotypical eyes, and that's why you see the negatives of it.
So I think it'd be interesting to see how that plays out a bit in terms of some of these different things. Like I said, it's a little bit about a different cognitive style, if you like. One of the we're going to pick out 4 kind of key things because we've only got a short amount of time, but hopefully this will give us an idea about some of the differences related to an autism diagnosis. So communication, social understanding, sensory processing, and information processing. The first one is around communication. Evidence kind of shows that autistic people can typically find it quite difficult to work with non-literal language. So when you said, can you take pictures, and I said, knock yourself out, that was probably not that helpful. Unless, of course, you thought I was going to knock you out. So the evidence kind of shows that autistic people find it more difficult to comprehend this figurative language and that type of stuff. And if you think about it, within your own working experience or your own life, how much of it is made up of non-figurative language, these kind of idioms that we use all the time. I mean, have a quick discussion because I'm going to hand these up. See if you can come up with 3 things that you use in your workplace or you use all the time, which are idioms that don't make any sense. Knock yourself out rather than, yes, please do that thing. Give me some examples. Have a quick chat.
What I would say is that since I've worked in the arts, I've stopped using as many it's quite difficult. Probably stopped.
Okay, so give me a couple of examples, things that you say in your workplace maybe, or things that come to mind? Shadow Eye, what do you got? Pull your socks up, good example. Anything else? Get a move on?
Go for it.
Go for it. Go for what? Go where? Yeah.
When have you gone above and beyond for a customer?
Always going above and beyond. Okay, so we use them all the time. They're part of our daily language. In front of you are some idioms. These idioms are real. I didn't make them up. These come from other parts of the world, Thailand, Sweden, Australia, wherever. I want you to have a go. These are just 3 examples. You've got to try and match up the idioms. That is the literal translation, the pull your socks up, with what it means. Work a bit harder. And so, the colors are irrelevant. Yeah, they're just like different colors.
That's not right. Do one of these. I've got that one actually. Oh yeah. Maybe. Yeah. Yeah. Which one? Oh, right, yeah.
Okay, I'm only going to give you 2 more minutes, and that's quite generous.
Where was that?
You have to do it. Okay, you've got 30 seconds.
Transcend the
Okay, last 10 seconds. You made it, that's fine.
I can work it out. That.
3, 2, 1. Right. So I'm not going to go through all the answers. Although I can show the answers to these. Let's see. What do we get for these ones? To jump from the cock to the donkey. What do people get for that?
Changing the topic of conversation.
To keep changing the topic of conversation. Did anybody get that one? Yeah? All right. We'll see if you're right. To slide in on a shrimp sandwich. I think that's Australian. Oh, look, you didn't just slide in on a shrimp sandwich. What'd you get for that one?
Got there without working for it.
Got there without working for it. Anyone get anything else?
Maybe.
Maybe. And I've got a cat's forehead. Yeah. To jump from the continent, that's a Thai saying. I think this is an Australian one, and this is a Japanese one. So to have a small house, I've got a cat's forehead. I suppose it's quite small in area. Japan. Yeah. So the point is that was a challenging exercise because you're having to try and work out what on earth, what is this about, and why would somebody say this? That could be, I guess, somebody's experience all the time. If you think about the amount of idioms and figurative language that is used all the time, particularly in English, but in all languages really. And so autistic people might be constantly trying to make sense of what's happening. A radical Bodhishina says it's almost like speaking a different language sometimes, because you've got all of these things I'm trying to interpret all at once. Is there anything you want to add about that? Or?
Yeah, processing time to make sense of what people are saying sometimes is incredible.
And sometimes that processing time can look like you're being, I'm not saying you,
Thoughtful.
It might look like someone's being rude or not interested, but actually it's just time to think, what? You just slid in a shrimp sandwich? What does that mean? Hang on a second. I'm processing that information maybe. So yeah, and I guess in terms of thinking about strange challenges, it's logical. I mean, to use language to say, do you mind if I take a picture and I say, yes, that's fine, rather than knock yourself out, it makes much more sense, much more logical to say what I mean rather than to say something which I don't mean. Think about sarcasm, irony, it's the opposite of what somebody means. That's not logical. So actually, depending on how we see it, it could be much more logical in that sort of way. And maybe it's about making some adjustments, which might be very small in terms of language, particularly in the employment settings.
Can I just say
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think sometimes people use idioms because they're trying to avoid saying things, so they know they're using a convoluted phrase, but because they find it difficult to say things straight.
Absolutely, yeah.
I was just looking at something the other day about euphemisms for death. It was something that cropped up and I Googled, and it was saying how it doesn't help people most of the time.
Yeah. So rather, just being direct might be more useful than saying they passed away or they've gone to a better place. Thank you. I guess where language is a part of it, that can also lead to social misunderstandings, and as part of the autism diagnosis, it's around social understanding and engaging in that sort of way. I suppose that kind of question, does my bum look big in this? There's only one answer. That can lead to, I guess, misunderstandings, sometimes in terms of trying to understand what somebody is expecting you to say. That might link to what's sometimes called the theory of mind. That's the ability to think about, put myself in somebody else's position. If they ask me that and I say, yeah, it does actually, they're going to feel hurt. So I maybe need to just lie and say, no, not at all. So but that being able to intuit might be challenging, and can sometimes lead to, I guess, social faux pas, or what feel like social faux pas. This is just a quotation from a study that was done down in Cambridge with students. I'll just read it. If I commit a social faux pas, which nobody else would have done, or so she thinks, I get depressed and behave awkwardly. I beat myself up excessively, self-deprecate, lose all self-confidence, and get depressed. I so often suffered from depression and suicidal urges before I got the diagnosis, as I thought my social difficulties were all due to myself being bad or mad. It didn't even occur to me that I just don't understand people, rather than I am terrible. I feel much easier after the diagnosis. So that level of emotional labor that goes into just talking to people sometimes and getting it wrong and thinking, oh, why did I say that? Isn't just the kind of thing that goes, oh, well, you know, just move on. That stayed with her all day. That stayed with her maybe for a long time. It led even to kind of suicidal ideations in terms of how she experienced life. So it's a serious thing in that sense. And so that level of kind of social misunderstanding and how a person might engage is challenging and is maybe more difficult for autistic people than for non-autistic people. What I want to do next is have a little think about the sensory environment. As I said, thinking about autism in terms of strength and difficulties can very often be around the context. Children in schools, for example. I was just listening to a talk this morning about transitions project in schools. Going from primary to secondary, primary schools tend to be a bit smaller, secondary schools much bigger, there's far more people, the corridors are busy, the canteen's full, it smells, etc. Those sensory environments can be really challenging. And an autism diagnosis is made up of a range of different things, but one of which is atypical or sort of different reactions in all 5 sensory modalities, so sight, sound, speech, touch, smell. And also the kind of the way a person might move as well, so proprioception too. And that can be either in terms of hyper-reactivity or hypo-reactivity. I worked in a severe learning disability school, and one of the boys in the class was hyposensitive in that he didn't feel anything, didn't feel the cold, or seemingly not. He could take very loud noises, he liked very deep touches, etc., all that kind of stuff. Other people might be hypersensitive. And what I wanted to do is to give us a sense of what that might be like to some extent. So this is made by the BBC, by Lena Hack and Sean Gilroy, who are based at the BBC. And they've got a thing called Project CAPE, which is about creating accessible professional environments, maybe. And Lena Hack is autistic, and she kind of worked with people to put together a simulation of what it might be like. So this is a BBC office. Now, on your desks, you will have, hopefully, one of these, and this will help you get this. I'm going to bring around some VR headsets in a little bit. I'll stick these on your desk if they're not there already. What you need to do is have a look for, well, see if you can get the YouTube app. If you need Wi-Fi, there's a YSJ guest, and it says Pride Hut 12. I'll stick a few of these on the table so people have them. If you've got the YouTube app, that's the best way to do it. So these instructions are on the page, but they're also here. Basically, I'd recommend probably just one person, maybe between two, has it. That's probably enough, and you can swap over. I'll stick my phone in one as well, just so you've got one. Has anyone got it yet? I can hear somebody's got it, or is that on your computer? On your computer, you probably get less on your computer because you can't move around. Oh, really? I'll stick it on one of these, and you can see if you can get it. So if I stick
Maybe it's only for the thing, no, mine. Yeah.
Okay, so So you know with VR you can move your head around. Like so.
Yeah. To simulate the other senses, like what could we do? Like, make people's clothes feel really itchy, like itching powder, and then like move the floor around somehow.
Just blow in the face. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go and get really close.
Yeah. Cold water. That's really bad smell.
I'll try my best. Have you had a chance to go as well?
No, not yet.
She's hogging it, is she? Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm still trying to work that bit out.
Well, certainly.
Mine was moving around.
Has everyone had a little bit of a chance to go? There's a virtual reality TED Talk back there. Okay. I hope everyone's had a bit of a chance to see what that was like or experience that. As I was saying, that's great.
Describe it to us, because we fail it, isn't it?
Does someone want to describe it?
Um,
What did you think? What was that? What was the experience? I don't know if you were able to hear it and see it as well.
it's a bit overwhelming, yeah.
A bit overwhelming. In what sense? Why? What was it that was challenging? So the light, the sound, the constant flickering of things. So you might have looked around and saw the carpet, the pattern of the carpet going, the wall behind moving, etc.
And that's just two of the senses as well.
Yeah, obviously.
The screen as well with the sentences.
Yep. And I don't know if you were able to hear, it might have been difficult, but this guy here was kind of leading the meeting and people were talking and they were saying, like every cloud has a silver lining and, using idioms like we talked about as well. So the whole experience was designed to demonstrate how stressful it might be in what seems like quite an innocuous situation. It's like, it's a team meeting. It's like, I'm going to throw a ball to you. You're going to say something. But it was designed to kind of go, well, actually, this is how somebody might be experiencing it. Even to look to the right to see the girl who's sitting beside, and her face was blurred out. So not to be able to recognize the face, even that might be and she said, "Do you not recognize me? I met you last week." That sort of social experience might be challenging as well. We'll come to that a bit more. I just want to give a bit of a chance for our autistic experts by experience to add anything. Is there anything you want to add about the experience of a sensory?
I didn't have a go because I find these things too triggering. I'm okay with things like VR games, like your PlayStations and stuff, that's fine, but it's not trying to replicate what I experience on a daily basis, and it's bad enough on a daily basis without sticking a headset on and seeing it again. But I know what they're like. I've not seen that one in particular, but I've tried a few, mainly when I was going through my sort of diagnostic journey. I've just said to David earlier, the thing that struck me when I was being diagnosed was I had no idea that everyone didn't experience the world like that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people say, how did you not know you were autistic? Well, that's just one of the many reasons, because I assumed everybody saw everything brighter and heard everything louder and, tasted things stronger. It's not necessarily my case with the taste, but you sort of get the idea. And the thing that I struggle with most, I'm assuming there was a lot of things with light on there.
Yeah.
And that's the area I kind of struggle the most with, which is why I always wear these. It's not because I'm bald.
What are you looking at me for?
Discussion, yeah. But yeah, it's mainly lighting with me, and I get I sort of live daily with nausea and dizziness. That's just daily life for me. It doesn't go away. I can wake up and feel sick as soon as I open my eyes in the morning, and that can last until I close my eyes at night. I feel dizzy on and off throughout every single day. And certain environments make it worse that I can't cope with. Extreme environments can make me fall to the floor, but that doesn't happen often because I know where to avoid. I'm okay with taste, unlike a lot of autistic people, but it's mainly light. Sounds, I struggle with, I say struggle in the sense that I can't filter it very well. So if I'm in a room that's even sort of 5 times the size of this, and it's filled with people doing different things, all the sounds that are in that room will be the same volume to me. So I'll struggle to have a conversation with the person next to me because I can't hear them very well. But having said that, when I say struggle, that's kind of a strong word because it doesn't really bother me, it's just more of an inconvenience. A lot of people it bothers and will hold their ears and will wear headphones. It doesn't hurt me in a sense, but it's difficult because you're trying to filter everything out and the brain just isn't wired to filter it.
Sorry, may I ask, are you saying that it's very distracting or that there's something more going on?
With the sound?
Yeah, you say it's not a struggle, but it sounds...
It's not a struggle as in the sense that I can cope with it perfectly fine. It's all I've ever known. I've not known anything different. I would imagine if somebody here doesn't struggle with that and it was thrust upon them all of a sudden, they would be extremely overwhelmed and quite anxious, but it's all I've ever known, so I don't know any different. So I don't struggle that way in the sense that it doesn't really bother me. I still like listening to music loudly. It doesn't hurt my ears anymore than it would hurt anybody else. Not the case for a lot of autistic people, but just in my case. But the one where I do really struggle is light. And I can't tell. The first thing, when I'm sort of giving talks, and if it's for somebody I've given a talk for before, the first thing they'll say to me when I'm going to whichever hall we're in or wherever, the first thing they'll turn around and say, how's the lighting for you? Because they know that I'm badly affected by it. But they don't have to ask, as you can tell. As soon as I walk in, if it's bad, I'll just walk straight back out and I really can't do anything. And sometimes it can be like hitting a brick wall when you walk in, it's absolutely, this is fine, but I'm not taking this off just in case. But it's fine.
And it's sometimes about it's like the different modalities. It's where sensory information is being processed, but it might be being processed in an amplified way all at once, which can lead to what some people experience as a sensory overload, where all of that comes all at once and is basically as your body going shut down. So that's where that can be a very distressing experience. This piece of research I did, there's a girl who worked in a large retailer, and she experienced what she called a meltdown in that shop, and that was she was exhausted. There was a lot of light, there was a lot of sound, there was a lot of people, and she was just like, she burst into tears and she just had to run out. And that was the experience of the sensory stimuli all kind of coming together all at once, alongside other things as well. So it can be a really distressing thing. As much as it might be distracting, it can also be hugely distressing as well.
I've also supported someone who's, in a very managed way, quite enjoyed that, the overwhelming sense of they're in a choir and they knew that the next day they couldn't leave the house and they needed silence, but they really enjoyed being really taken at detail and more affected by the music than the other things of the choir.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just conscious of the time, so we'll skip on to the next bit. As I said, that sensory overload is about processing sensory and stimuli in that sense, but there's also processing lots of information all the time. Simon Baron-Cohen, who's probably one of the leading experts in the field of autism, talked about the idea of kind of systematizing of information particularly. And this is, we're talking about strengths, difficulties. I guess that sort of, kids lining toys up at an early age might be one of the first signs where parents go, oh, that's a bit strange, or that's a bit different, etc., or an insistence on having things a particular way. And what Baron-Cohen and others have begun to do is to think, well, is that kind of depending on the context? If somebody has it likes to do things like that way, well, depending on what we're asking them to do, that might actually be a strength. So he talks about the idea of hyper-systematizing. As part of the cognitive style of people with autism, systemizing theory argues that excellent attention to detail is directed towards detecting if P then Q rules, so recognizing kind of patterns, if this happens, that will be the outcome, etc. Such law-based pattern recognition systems can produce talent in systemizable domains. So depending on where it is, that could be a problem. If you want somebody to do something, but they're insistent on doing it a particular way, then maybe that would be challenging. But in the right context, maybe in a work context, if it requires following if P then Q rules, and lots of jobs do, auditing, for example, looking through lots of data, or doing jobs which have to follow particular protocols, well, then that might be actually a real strength and asset in the company. And in fact, lots of employers recognize that and say, our autistic employees who have those rules and use those skills are our most productive, our most effective, our best employees in that sense. So depending where it is, it could be a strength. And that's that kind of contextual thing, I guess, that's important in that. That idea, he talks here about the law-based pattern recognition being really important, and that's sometimes about kind of seeing details over the big pictures. We don't really have time to show this, but Udo Frith, who's a psychologist, uses this example of Where's Wally in terms of the big picture and the details. And she does a little kind of experiment type thing with, there's a documentary, using this, and the autistic people were able to look and find Wally much, much quicker. This isn't a psychological test, but it was about the kind of the big picture and the detail. And whilst not seeing maybe the big picture as a seascape or whatever, they were able to hone in and go, there's Wally there. Spoiler. Sorry. So that can sometimes be seen as a kind of what might be called a weak central coherence, not seeing the big picture, the holistic picture. But equally, it can be seen as a strength because it's the capacity to see the detail that other people are missing. And that detail and processing of that information has to do with a superior perceptual functioning. So what Motch and others call the kind of superior perceptual functioning, a superior perceptual trace was believed to be responsible for enhanced memory of the surface properties of visual and auditory patterns. There's evidence to say that within auditory and olfactory type sensory experiences, there's higher success in that, and equally with this kind of visuospatial awareness as well. Two little things to have a go at then. See if you can find this shape in there, and then see if you can find this shape in any of these. Have a little go. So everybody should, over time, be able to find it. Does anyone find this shape here, this cuboid? Is that a cuboid? Yeah? Good, thank you. Anyone find it? Yeah, hopefully. So that's the front square going back like that. There it is in there. And this one, you should probably find that one pretty quick, I would have thought. And then you might find it up here, and you might find it down here, and you might find it down here as well. So they become more and more complex as they go through. These are the kind of embedded figure tests, if you like. and all people, I guess, could do them. Everybody could find the shape, but this evidence suggests that autistic people have this superior perceptual functioning, so they typically do this a lot faster. And that eye for detail is a big part of that. So picking out things, not just seeing details, but processing information in a different way. That different cognitive style is what underpins that, I guess. Another part of that can be around how we process information in detail-based or in holistic senses. In the little VR thing, you might have seen the person, you, couldn't recognize the face of the person beside them. That's sometimes called face blindness, if you like. So not recognizing that. And that's sometimes to do with a kind of not being able to look at the whole of a face and perceive that. So maybe perceiving the details, the parts of the face in different ways. And various studies have kind of looked at this in terms of discriminating parts of the face. So have a little go. See if you can work out, it's going to be quite hard with this light, but which eyes and which mouths go with which person. This is an example of the kind of test, but it is not the actual psychological test. I've just got these four women's heads and eyes. but I haven't covered back yet. Their bodies are distributed all over Europe.
But not literally.
But not literally. So again, you might be able to do this, you would think over time. Again, autistic people were typically much faster at doing this. So they were able to discriminate the featural configural information in the mouth region of a face, but were compromising their ability to have the configural information of the eyes. And sometimes the eye, there's studies which suggest it might be because eyes are related to threat sometimes even. So some autistic people might not choose or might not like to look people in the eyes for that reason. And that can partly be to do with maybe processing information, but it might also be a social aspect as well. But mouths, they were much faster. So these are all inverted, upside down, etc. But they were able to process that kind of local information much faster than other people. So whilst not necessarily having the whole, that kind of detail was equally there and quite strong.
You know, you're saying autistic people are faster.
Yeah.
Started off by saying everyone's different.
Sure.
So you're saying all autistic
Nope.
people?
In typically in these experiments that they do, and I'm not a psychologist, but in these sort of experiments where they're trying to, I don't know, well, they're trying to work out why it might be difficult for people to recognize faces. Is it because of the mouths? Is it because of the eyes? Is it because of how they process that information? But typically in all of these tests, yeah, autistic people were more successful, faster in these things. But yeah, but it isn't to say that every person will do that necessarily, or that every person doesn't like making eye contact, or that every autistic person can't do that. Of course, it's going to be varied, absolutely. So yeah, it's a good point. Highly skilled and interests. You might have noticed as you came in a whole range of different things. All of these have been made or manufactured or put together by Andrew, who might talk a little bit more about them in the second half. But they all represent, I guess, what can be seen as sort of like specialist interests. Lots of autistic people have things which they're really, really into, really interested in, that can go into huge amounts of depth. And Andrew will talk more about this. In fact, do you just want to say just what these three things are?
The top left one is a den that I constructed for my little nephew. It consists of a swing slide, and you know, there.
So you both designed and built
Yeah,
it?
I designed it in CAD.
Yep.
Computer-aided design, and constructed it in my brother's garden.
This down here, which I think you can see a version of back here, possibly?
That's the canopy off a scratch-built model that I've made. And at the front, you can see a Bluetooth receiver, for which I use to turn the lights on inside the model. Using my phone, using my smartphone. I've also used, I think there's two Arduinos that I've used. But the majority of it is made out of things like all the remote controls. You can see the front of all the remote control at the front. At the top, is a printer cartridge. There's a drain pipe. So it's made out of odds and ends.
And you can have a little look at one back there that you
Yeah,
brought along.
yeah,
And then just very, very quickly, Andrew, just explain what this is.
Well, I have a very rare condition. It's been genetically confirmed. PMPO deficiency, for which my medication is B vitamins. And this is the three-dimensional molecular structure of pyridoxine, vitamin B6, that again I drew on the computer.
So these are just 3 examples, and every person will be different, and the things they're into, etc., and the levels to which they go into those, or the depth they go into those. But I guess the point is, special interest could, in the right context, be something which is very advantageous in a workplace or in an employment setting. So sometimes they can be seen as problems. It's like, why are you interested in this one thing? Well, it depends what it is, and it depends how it's used. I guess that's the point. And I think maybe the final thing we'll leave on is how autism is made of a range of things which might be challenging, but there are also strengths there. And Van Hees and others kind of say autistic individuals' different way of processing information also gives rise to some exceptional skills and talents, strong memory, focused perception, an eye for detail, dedication, the ability to putting one's mind to a subject, analytical skills, and powers of observation. So depending on the context, these are part of an autism diagnosis as well, and they are strengths. Colleagues in the States and the UK who are autistic had looked at this idea and said, yes, it's all very well, there are strengths, but it really depends. I think this model is quite helpful for thinking about it. It's like kind of this experience of difference, processing, perceptual, sensory, personality traits, etc. Well, they go into cognition, and they might lead to enhanced memory or attention to detail or focus. But they might also create false dichotomies in terms of seeing it as a strength or a weakness, maybe. And it's here, I think this is important, it's the moderating influence. It's about the extent to which that's the case. The sensory environment, for example, the extent to which that's just distracting or distressing, or it doesn't affect someone at all. The social context depends. Am I being, how high is the level of what I need to do here? The context is important. And the perspective of themselves and of others as well. These moderating factors then mean it's either seen as an advantage, or it might be seen as a disadvantage, but that's really important. It depends. And from an employment perspective, that's, I guess, really important. Do we see these things as employers, as colleagues, as hiring managers, as whoever? Do we see them as something which is a strength, an advantage, something which can add to a place and give someone a real bonus in a workplace? Or is it something which might actually end up being a disadvantage for them? Could lead to much poorer outcomes in terms of psychological distress, maybe mental health challenges, poor relationships. It depends how they're perceived. It depends on these moderating factors largely. So I want to give us some time just to have a little break, first of all. And then in the second part, then we're going to focus more on autism and employment and speak and hear from our panel. So there's still some cake left. So far, no fire alarms have gone off, which is good, and none are expected. The toilets are just here, just through the doors and then along the corridor to the right. The toilets are the same place in the floors above and below as well, if you need a different one. And shall we take 10 minutes? We'll be back at 1:45, is that okay? Gives us 45 minutes for panel and then discussion.
Sorry, may I just photograph this?
Yeah, of course.
This one's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I put I put all the things here as well. So you can...
Oh, lovely.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. All blurred probably, but that's
So where are you based? Are you with colleagues?
Helen and I are together and work with a company called Autism. So we're based in York.
Yes. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. And so what kind of work do you do then?
Well, I'm mainly the SEND specialist, so I focus on dyslexia. And then there are also sort of side projects about autism, which is one of the reasons I come to these places. The more of these things I get, the better it is. I mean, if I can ask you, I hope you don't mind. I'm asking you a question, and I hope you see this as a sympathetic question rather than anything else. I still have a problem with this idea of a spectrum. Because if you have to say, may I touch this for a second? If you take, for instance, so if you take, for instance, something like, I don't know, motor skills or something like that, and there's this side and that side. Well, I don't know what it means to be like 100% motor skills. And then if you are, then another one is maybe social skills.
Yeah, which I think is that's the point they're going to make. It's like it's kind of false dichotomy.
But they're incommensurable. You can't measure one against the other, can you?
It's kind of based on a neurotypical sort of thing. Motor skills, I guess, would be just the ability to write.
Yeah, but I mean,
because a lot of people may not be able to grip the pen, for example, with autism. I mean, not necessarily.
No, I mean, I'm dyslexic. I'm dyslexic. I have motor skills.
I work at the Autism Hub, which is a United Response Service. So we support autistic adults. And I think whilst perhaps somebody we would then say, okay, these guys are not. Perhaps we drew a picture. It may be that also, let's say we drew a picture. The picture itself may not necessarily mean anyway to the person who responds. But if we presented it in a way such as layering up a picture, and we painted and the person painted this one colour, and then we layered up, and we've made lots of mosaic type pictures that way. You are still giving somebody the ability to
see. I like this. Yeah,
so they can create something, even though the actual minute detail of really getting in the lines.
Yeah.
So it's working around.
And I think in a way that's a really nice idea. The idea of modelling and remodelling this spectrum, because I still don't understand what it would mean to be 100% on one scale and 100% on another, and compare the two of them.
And that's where psychologists, that's their domain, and they sort of they treat things which are social phenomena like or at least socially constructed. What is it, motor skills? What does that really mean, like you say, or theory of mind? It's like it's a theory. It's not an actual thing. It's a socially constructed idea. And you've got a really good theory of mind or not really good theory of mind. So I mean, it's always flawed in that sense, and I think that's the point that they're making. And so it's like Ginny Russell and Steve Capp, who's written about that, is autistic, and
it's Russell and
it's about it's about 6 of them, but it's Ginny Russell, Stephen Capp. Others, you should be able to access it. I'm pretty sure it might even be open access. But yeah, that's what they're kind of saying. It's like they create these false dichotomies to say like, oh, you've got enhanced or you've got a problem with X or Y. It's like, do I? It's not.
It's still what you say with the 100% and not at 0. It's still a kind of a conventional scale.
They just want to quantify things,
but it's the way
it's the
way that it's easy to relay that, isn't it? And that's difficult. It's a difficult.
There's always that balancing act between the simplicity of something that people can understand it versus whether it's as meaningful as it could be when it's simple. And it's
but it's very difficult. I mean, we would, if somebody had communication, for example, somebody who can't write actually type really well on the keyboard, so that becomes to actually most skills of doing that are very well developed, but just not printing a pen, for example, or I don't know.
Oh, no. I mean, I have terrible.
It's difficult, isn't it?
I have terrible judge of distance. I have no sense of distance perception whatsoever. And yet, when I was younger and capable, I was a championship fencer. And those two don't clearly. They don't go together. And yet they did. And so it's.
That's interesting.
It's also why I've had 5 operations on the knees.
I guess you must have. But I suppose it's in the context of that situation.
Yeah. But thank you. What's your name, sorry?
I'm Andy.
Andy, thanks very much. I appreciate it. Martin.
I run on coffee if I can get it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So we'll start again in about 1 minute. Just very brief lecture.
I don't want there to be any way.
Well, you're absolutely right. If you all come up and say,
Actually, also like funny as I was born. It's a shock. It's one of those ones where you take the cap and the hair comes with it.
yeah. You do one of those guys. Okay, I'm going to take the story. So, you can say that in a second because
I've been so good on the cake.
So I'll link. I'll just do a quick one. So I hope the first hour has been helpful just to understand a bit more, like I said, around what autism diagnosis is, how it might be seen in terms of challenges, but also strengths. Before we just get to our panel, I guess the link to employment is in terms of trying to understand how, depending on how we see this, we could see employment in autism as being an opportunity. So in the States, I said the tagline for this was called Ready, Willing, and Able. And that's a program in Canada that runs right across the whole of Canada. And one of their big things was saying, we need to move away from a charity-based view of things. It's like, oh, it's a nice thing for employers to do, or it's a nice thing for companies to do, to see it in terms of, no, it's a smart thing for businesses to do. There is an advantage to employing people who see the world differently, who experience it differently, who come at it and problem solve in different ways. And some of these things are just some of the advantages that they recognise and what they try and really impress upon employers. And we're talking about big employers, Microsoft, SAP, Google. These are employers who are actively going out and recruiting autistic people because they see the advantage that could be there. These capabilities we talked about, the value of reliability, of the lost earnings in terms of having to recruit new people, the lost time when someone's not in a post, etc. Evidence suggests people stay in their roles much longer than anybody, well, much longer, and that reliability is really important. The value of retention that goes with that, being at work on time, the benefits of inclusive hiring, how that's good for a company, in both in terms of what it looks like, the optics of that. Microsoft get a lot of kudos from saying, hey, we're very inclusive. But also, Microsoft then get better outcomes because they're inclusive, because they have people doing things in different ways. So it's about kind of looking at the business case for that. And I want to link that then to our speakers for the panel and find out a bit more about that experience and how that works in practice as well. So I'll invite Ronnie's here, David and Andrew. Do you want to come up? And Emily's going to
Thank you. So if I just ask our panels to talk a bit about their own experiences, and then in about 5-10 past, go over to you if you have any questions for us as well. Any volunteers to go first?
Go on then. Yeah.
Thanks, Andy. So could you start by just introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Andrew. In 2012, I was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition known as PMPO deficiency. What this entails is that I've had seizures from a young age, and I've had a late diagnosis of both dyslexia and Asperger's syndrome. I'm very interested in model making, design, and science.
Thank you. And what's your experience of looking for work?
Mostly work experiences, but there seems because of the seizures mainly. But having said that, I did the virtual reality. My epilepsy is photosensitive, but the medication, which is vitamins, not anti-epileptic drugs, controls this aspect.
And so you've explained that one of the barriers to employment, so the epilepsy. How have employers reacted to that?
When I've been for interviews, it's made them. You can see that they don't really want to sort of employ you because of the seizures. They're maybe frightened, or I don't know.
Yeah, but you do have a lot of strengths to bring.
They are,
Do you
yeah.
want to talk about the strengths that?
I do. I'm a qualified computer-aided design technician. Most of the work in my portfolio is self-taught. I've done my own research into my own condition. As I say, I've had a genetic test, and I've been talking to a professor who's a genetics team in London via email. I've done a lot of research myself. In fact, it was through my own research that I had an inkling that I had Asperger's syndrome. And then I took a lot of my research to my GP. And from that, she forwarded me to Sheffield, where I was officially diagnosed.
And have you had some positive experiences of it, employment, of work experience?
Yeah, I did. I drew plans for pubs. And what my work experiences involve architects' offices, structural engineers. One company designed trailers for Formula One teams, and I was given the job of developing the locker doors, which I did. I did a methodology, an exploded drawing of the mechanism. I did costing. With another company, I went on site working on a multi-million-pound extension for a hospital in Leeds. So I went on site there, where I ended up at the top, standing on the helipad. I was looking. Was looking down a lift shaft, right, so my epilepsy is fairly well controlled. I still have like absence seizures, but it's fairly well controlled.
Thank you. Andrew, I don't want this to sound like a job interview in front of a big group of people. That's not what I'm trying to do. So is there something you would like employers to know about autism?
As far as I know, I don't have many of the sensory issues. I'm nervous, and I have Asperger's, and I struggle when it comes to being on the spot. I mean, today I've had time to rehearse. I mean, I'm struggling a bit, but not as much as I would if I were actually, given this without having gone through.
So yeah, you come across someone who's very skilled, considering you're self-taught, all these things that you've done through your experience, but an interview where you're put on the spot isn't necessarily the place where you would show those strengths. So thank you. Right, David, same questions really. So if you could tell us about yourself and your experiences of work, good and bad.
Yeah, I'll try not to, because if I start talking, I'm going to go up to. I've done quite a bit of stuff. I started off in the Merchant Navy, did that for about a year, then ended up in the Air Force for nearly 20 years. Started off in the ranks, but got my commission. Ended up doing stuff like leading the computer support for Skynet, which is a British military satellite communication system. I'm a chartered engineer. I've got a diploma in accounting and finance. When I came out of the Air Force, I had to, because I didn't get promoted because I didn't fit in socially. I couldn't get a job. So I had to create a job for myself. So I spent 20 years as an entrepreneur, which all came to a crashing halt last year when I ended up bankrupt. And so I've needed to get a job. And I think looking back, since leaving the Air Force, I've always been looking for a job, which is why I went and did a PhD in part-time along the way. So I tried to get a job here at the Autism University, and I failed the interview first time. But they said, David, come in. We'll give you a try. You've got the knowledge. We'll give you try it out, see how you get on. And so I did, and they kept giving me more work and more lectures and more students. And then another job came up, so I applied for it and failed. And they said, oh, but you did better than last time. We'll give you some coaching. Just carry on doing what you're doing, and here's some more work, David. Can you do these 25 videos for this online master's course? I said, yes, of course. So I did that, and then they advertised the job again. They didn't tell me, and I hadn't had any coaching, but I applied anyway. I got shortlisted, I had an interview, and I failed again. They said, David, I'm sorry, you've done worse than you did last time. Your interview was even worse. You were very critical of the school. But they did ask me in the interview, David, what do you think of MBAs? And so I told them exactly what I thought about MBAs. And about the school should be doing something different. So, David, you're very critical of MBAs and very critical of the school. But never mind, could you do some more work for us, please? So, yes, I'm a part-time lecturer because I can't. I've always been in work. It's just I've never actually always been paid for it. So yeah, I better stop rambling there.
No, you're not rambling at all. What strengths and skills do you find that you bring to workplaces? Paid or unpaid?
Yeah, I'm a problem solver. I'm an engineer. I'm a problem solver. I get passionate about a problem, and then I'll go and solve it. So when I picked up a book off the airport books, I was as a leader in the Air Force, and I was into management and leadership, and I was learning all about it. And I'd pick up a book and say The Art of Leadership, or The Art of Management, or The Art of this, that, the other. I look in the book, so where does it say art? Art is not in the index. How can you title a book that's called The Art of something if it doesn't say it's art? So I went and did my PhD. I said, right, I'm going to study the art of management. And this was Lancaster University, one of the top management research universities in the UK. And I remember the panel as I transferred from doing just an ordinary master's thing to PhD. And I went in and I presented them the theory of art. And there was about 4 or 5 of the great and good of the professors of sociology and everything else, but all management school people. And I gave them Andy Warhol, Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin, and others. And a theory of art that I could transcend and talk about the art of management. But it said, David, there's nothing about management on here. I think, and then they sent me out and they called me back in and said, right, David, we think you're the sort of person that could do a PhD. We don't think your subject is very good, it's very risky, but because you're paying for it yourself, we'll let you do it anyway. So I did it. 2 years later, I passed, no errors, no corrections, no further work. The book contract was a month after my graduation, and I won 2 international awards for that one. And there is a theory of the art of management out there. And someone will probably pick it up off the bookshelf in Harvard when I'm dead, and I might then pick a posthumous name for myself. But anyway, yes.
And as someone who's been an employer manager yourself, and also as a recently diagnosed person, what message would you have for employers about autism?
It's a conversation. As an employer, I've employed people, I've been a leader of men, and I found that a lot easier than I did as an employee. Because I don't have the ability to read social situations and people. As a leader, I've got that bit of distance between me and the people I work for. I respected the people that worked for me, and I supported them to my disadvantage with my superiors, because I looked after my troops. But I wasn't close with them. They weren't my friends. There was always this professional distance. I found I could cope with that. What I couldn't cope with was actually the mixing with the officer class that I was supposed to. As an employee, it's a conversation, and now I know what I am, because I didn't know all this for 60 years. Now I know what I am. It's a conversation. We are all different. The employment system is not broken to my mind, for people with autism or anything, or any diversity. It's not broken because it's not a system. It's a capitalist economy. It exists, organizations exist to produce profit. So if we want to be part of it, those autistic people, or if any people out there, neurotypical people want to create a company that's making profit, you've got to ask yourself, how am I going to make that profit? What do I need in terms of resources to make that? And what a lot of companies are finding out, they need the skills that some of the autistic people have got in abundance. Now, it's not a question of, so give us a job because I'm autistic and I feel as I should have a job because the employment system should give me a job. It's not a system. The companies out there say, look, I need this skill. I need your abilities to solve problems, David. I need you to produce all these lectures, these MBA material for the university, David. Well, have a conversation about me, with me, and how I can deliver that. And yes, I can do this, but what you've got to accept is this is what I'm like. And yeah, if you want my skills, then ask me how you can support me to give you that. And we're all different. And I don't think we can, yes, there are labels, autism, Asperger's, high functioning, low functioning, ADHD, DHD. We're all different. And the trouble with most, am I going off?
No,
The trouble with most, everything, the wrong things are being systematized. We're systematizing interview processes when we should be engaging with the employee, and the employee should be engaging to find out about each other, about who can do what for who and how that can be supported. Full stop.
It's a culture of disclosure where
Yeah.
you can find best skills from people.
I hate form. The problem I've got with the university's job application system, it's standardized, and they standardize it because some time ago in sort of organizational theory, they say, well, we've got to be fair to every potential employee that we want to recruit. Therefore, we've got to ask them all the same questions. And that doesn't work. Because if you ask the same questions, you get people groomed to answer them in the same way. And you get cookie cutter people, and we are self-selecting towards mediocrity. So let's engage in a conversation, people.
Thank you. And Ronnie, I'm leaving the professional speaker to last. Could you tell the room about, well, introduce yourself and some of the challenges and the successes you've had with work? So if you start by introducing yourself.
I'm Ronnie. I'm married with 5 daughters, and I'm only mentioning it so that I can mention that one of them is also autistic, just in case anybody wants to ask later, even personally or whatever. One of them is autistic, and unlike a lot of the stories you hear, I was late diagnosed as well. I was diagnosed the same month that I turned 45, so that was a good birthday present that year. And one of the reasons that my daughter was diagnosed isn't like you hear a lot of the time where your child gets diagnosed and then one of the parents starts thinking, oh, actually, I was like that and I think like that. I wonder if, and they end up getting a diagnosis. It was the other way around. It was purely because I was diagnosed that I recognised certain things in my own daughter without the sort of research that I spent years doing on a daily basis for several years to come to the conclusion that I think I might be autistic. I better look into it. It's only because of that I was able to recognise it in my own daughter. Had I not done that, like a lot of people, autism wasn't what I thought it was, and I wouldn't have picked up on the little subtleties, especially in girls, which tend to present differently to boys, and they can be more subtle, and they tend to often mask themselves a lot more. So that was the advantage of me getting a diagnosis, in the sense that my daughter got a diagnosis in childhood, so she's got the advantage of interventions and help where it's needed, and luckily she's not really needing too much. That's a long answer, isn't it? I am an autistic speaker, so I travel around different places giving talks on whatever they're asking me to give talks on. Cut a long story short, it can be anybody from doctors to the university to GPs to the general public to whatever sort of sends me a request, really. But I also, as I mentioned briefly earlier, I also work part-time in the supermarket. Couple of reasons. One of the reasons, not the main reason certainly, but one of the reasons is in the sort of autistic speaking world, some jobs you take because they pay very well, and I've got children to feed, and that's the honest answer. Some jobs you take because they don't pay at all, but they may be either a charity, or it could be, I always look at when somebody asks me to give a talk, if it's not paid, I always look and base it on what it's about, what it's for, who's behind it, what the outcomes are going to be. And if it's something I think where somebody in that audience might gain something that will help them, or directly or indirectly help an autistic person, which is the most important thing I think about, then I would say yes. But because I say yes to a lot of things that don't pay, I also need a backup plan. So that's one of the reasons why I also work part-time in the supermarket. The other reason is, like a lot of autistic people, I need quite a bit of routine in my life, and my other work doesn't give me any routine. I can be in a different place each time I go and give a talk. It can be a different topic, different audience, different time of day. But the job I do in the supermarket is probably the most mundane job in that store, and it's very routine. You clock in, you do the same job every day, you clock out at the same time every morning. And I work on a morning, and that frees up the rest of the day for me, but that gives me enough comfort, if you like, a lack of anxiety to a degree. It helps with the anxiety, having that to start my day off. So the two reasons, financial and again that way. So I've got two jobs.
Thank you. And could you tell us about the strengths and skills that you bring to the workplace? That does sound like an interview question.
It does, yeah. And just touching briefly on what David said. I mean, he put it much better than I could put it. And interviews, you know, we were having a discussion earlier about interviews. Interviews, you gain very little knowledge about a person from an interview other than how sociable they are, which doesn't help us three very much. You also learn how well they've rehearsed the interview techniques, how cool they can play themselves, because it's a persona they're putting on. You're not seeing them, no matter how relaxed they might be or how natural they'll be. Part of it's always an act, good or bad. And the person that they're turning the jobs down for, such as maybe Andy, they're missing out on probably the best person they could employ. Whereas I see from experience some of the people that they do employ might be great at interviews, and afterwards you watch them thinking, how the hell did you end up in this company? And they're stuck with them. You know, it's harder and harder to get rid of people nowadays. So what's the question?
So is there something that you want employers to understand about autism that maybe you think they don't understand, or the general public?
Pretty much everything. It's yeah. I mean, I'm probably going to jump onto your last question about if you're going to ask the same one about what you would want employers to know, and it kind of ties in with that.
Yeah.
The one thing I would want employers to know is that autism isn't what you think it is. For the simple, I say that because the one thing that gets said to me, a lot of people talk to me after talks, and the one thing I hear all the time from people is, it's not what I thought it was. And, I had so many preconceptions about what autism was and what autistic people experienced, and I was wrong. And it's really that getting through to them that it's not what you think it is, whatever you think it is. And I'm as guilty as anybody else, because before I was diagnosed and I did all the research myself, my knowledge of autism was probably rainbow. You know, and it's sadly, luckily we're moving away from that, but sadly some people still have that. But there's so many misconceptions about autism, and I was guilty of them all as well until, you know, I went through diagnosis. It's probably that, and getting through to employers the advantages and the skill set we can bring. Somebody, I don't know if it was David or even Jonathan, touched on basically Silicon Valley, Google, and, you know, YouTube and Microsoft were recruiting specifically autistic people last year. And there's a very good reason why there's such a huge population of autistic people in Silicon Valley at the moment. And it's because we think differently. Actually, that's a good slogan for somebody should use that. But yeah, we think differently. We think outside the box. Outside the box, exactly, Andy. It's
there are no boxes.
There isn't. It's only the boxes.
The only box is the one you make yourself. It's not a natural thing.
We quite often we'll attack things in a completely different way, and an employer might go, "I've never thought of that in a million years," you know. And there's certain skills that autistic people have that non-autistic people simply don't have. Don't ask me to name them because I've not had the experiences, but I've heard so many stories from people where that, you know, they've been lucky enough to actually prove this to somebody and have gone very far with their careers. In things like tech and other stereotypical tech for autistic people, but, you know, it happens a lot. So it's really getting through to people. Whatever your preconceptions are, put them aside. Talk to autistic people, especially. Jonathan said a fantastic thing earlier. And Jonathan, there's many autistic allies who really aren't autistic allies, and sort of spreading misconceptions and myths that really aren't helping the autistic community. Jonathan's one of the great exceptions to that, and he touched on it earlier with a few things he said involving autistic people, and he said about listening to autistic people, and that's the important thing. Too many employers especially will listen to what non-autistic people are saying about, you know, what it's like to be autistic. Well, you don't know what it's like to be autistic. And there's one thing I say, and some parents get annoyed when I say it, but I'm a parent myself, so I'm going to say it, is too many people will say, well, I've got an autistic child, you know, but the parent might not be autistic. And I usually kind of silence them and say, do they have sensory overload? Yeah. What's that feel like? And they'll give me the textbook definition of what it's like. I don't know what it actually feel like. Don't tell me what it says in the book you just read, or what somebody's told you, or what a psychologist has read out to you. Tell me what it feels like, because that's what your child's feeling. And they can't unless they speak to an autistic person. So there's a whole list of things that you can gain by speaking to autistic people. As far as employers go, if you want to know what autism is really like, as Jonathan was saying, speak to the autistic people.
And Ronnie, that segues perfectly to any questions. Hands up, if anyone's got any.
I was just going to say actually with Ronnie, your autism diagnosis has really become your new career, hasn't it? Well, I've given you your new
Very
career.
accidentally.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just sort of spiraled out of control,
Yeah,
but it's one that I enjoy.
But that has actually helped unlock a career that you didn't otherwise know you could have.
And I experienced the same difficulties that Andy experiences, because I was applying for jobs and people just weren't, you know, even if I got an interview, Andy touched on being nervous. I mean, I would clam up, and I would, and there was even I'll give a very quick example of something that I've shared with Jonathan before, that happened to me a year or two back, where a job came up after I'd had a diagnosis and started giving talks and things like that. And I'd moved on to other things as well. So I was going off on different avenues, and I was mentoring students, and I was delivering training to organisations. And a job came up, and it was perfect because I work in a supermarket because of the routine and everything else, but I would rather work in the autism field and still have a routine because I still have an employer and everything else. And this job came up working for, let's say it's an education establishment that isn't this one, and I'll leave it there. Just to point out it wasn't the Oxford John. But the job came up, and it was basically, in a nutshell, it was mentoring autistic students, further education students. And it meant that I could leave the supermarket but still have the routine of working for an employer and taking the knowledge that I'd gained over the last several years with me to that. And the list of criteria for the job, you know, had everything they asked for and more. And I applied for the job. I mentioned on there where it says, do you have a disability, which is another topic for another day. Are you disabled? Are you not? Personally, I say yes. And I put that was autistic, and I never heard a thing. And I thought, normally when I apply for a job and I don't hear anything, well, that's another one I've not heard from. But this one, I will get this really quick. This one was, it bugged me, and it really ate at me, because I had all the experience, the knowledge they needed, and I was autistic. And I'd done a conference for the Royal College, and it was all GPs. And there was somebody came up and spoke to me afterwards about his child who was starting university, and they were worried. And they said that the best thing that happened to them was they'd got a mentor who was autistic, and the autistic mentor got it so much more. And I thought, this is the job for me. You know? And I never heard a thing. It bugged me so much that I emailed them and said, can you give me some feedback? And they gave me all the stuff. Oh, you didn't have enough experience. And I went, what? And the person they gave the job to, you know, wasn't being autistic, because the job came up again. And it wasn't long after. And I thought, do you know what? This bugs me so much. I'm going to reapply. And I reapplied, but I didn't put that I was autistic, hoping they'd forgotten about, you know, my name and everything else. They clearly had, because they offered me an interview. And it bugged me, and I didn't go, because I thought, I don't want to work for a company where I can't disclose, because if they're not going to employ autistic people, I don't want to work for them anyway. So the career, luckily, as you said, there's a very long answer to your question.
I mean, I wasn't making light of the
No,
fact that
not at all. No, but
because
it's luckily it has sort of spiraled that way, because I'm still stuck in retail, if you like, which I don't want to do, but you know, I would rather be doing those hours, working, doing what I enjoy and what I can give back, rather than just for the routine.
So, yeah, I was talking to, by the way, thank you. I was really interested listening to you. And you all mentioned in some respects interviews and how interviews can be a struggle. I was talking to an autistic guy not that long ago. He said that he passed an interview, got a job, but actually once he got the job, he couldn't really, he didn't feel comfortable in that job and he had to leave the job. And this seems to be the experience of a lot of people. You mentioned the interview, but what about retention? What's the issue with retention? What could employers do to retain you, to make you feel comfortable and secure and able to contribute in a company once you're there?
I think a good understanding of our conditions. Some it varies. Some employers are good at this, at understanding, and like a friendly environment, and allow us to take our time, but not to the extent where it holds people up. I'm best when I'm in my special interests. I'd like to use my skills as part of my career, because outside of my skills, I think I'd struggle.
Thank you. David, have you got an answer to that one?
I think it comes down to the conversation. If it's two-way and it's proper communication in a proper conversation, then you're setting expectations, and there's a good chance you can deliver on those expectations, both sides, both parties to the contract. So that's important. If somebody applies for a job and passes a formulaic interview, it doesn't set any expectations really of what that's going to be like once you get through. And it can be completely wrong for both parties. I mean, whenever I've interviewed people, it's been on a personal level. I've never really done a formulaic interview. I might have had the questions and it spurred a conversation. I might have had a crib sheet of some questions in case the conversation dried up, or just to keep some focus. But it's always been a conversation, and I've never really ticked boxes or written answers against those questions. It's been about what did I feel, and my whole theory of art of management research actually comes down to using your judgment. And when you've got conditions of uncertainty, which an interview situation is, because no party in that potential contract actually knows everything about the other person. So there is always a condition of uncertainty in that relationship. So in conditions of uncertainty, you cannot rely on rational judgment. You have to be able to use intuition. And that was my whole thesis was about, it doesn't really matter what you do as long as you do something.
I just really quickly add something
Yes,
as well. One thing that's really important as well is reasonable adjustments in the workplace to retain autistic staff. The job that I do in a supermarket on a morning, I wouldn't be able to carry on doing that without the reasonable adjustments that I went and sat down with them about, talked to them, had it written down, agreed, and they've made a massive difference. And it's little things as well. There's certain parts of the store, much to the annoyance of some of the other members of staff, but that's not my problem, is certain parts of the store I can't go into for sensory reasons. And I said, that's fine, we'll make sure that for your job, which I should be going into those parts of the store, but for your specific job, we can make sure you're doing these and don't have to go over the area that's going to make me extremely dizzy and disorientated and feel very sick. And little things as well, there's one part of the store I couldn't avoid going into, and there's one cabinet in the store, a chiller cabinet, and the light was so intense and flickering and noisy, and that's another story for another day, but the electricity, I could hear it in it, it was that bad. And it was so severe I couldn't go near it, but I needed to. And when I spoke to them about it, one of the managers' simple response was they took the bulb out. And to this day, that was a few years ago, nobody's ever noticed that the bulb's not in. You walk down the store and they're all lit up and there's one that's not lit up. And nobody's noticed, but it means I can go down there and do the job and carry on. Reasonable adjustments make a massive difference. And it doesn't take much for an employer. Luckily, the one I'm working for even took it a stage further and have a quiet room set up as well. So,
Thank you.
We've not got too much time.
I wanted to ask Dave, as an employer and a manager,
Yeah.
what provision, accommodation, reasonable adjustments do you think you made for neurotypical people?
Well, it comes down to this conversation. If I know who is in front of me, who's going to come and work for me, and get a sense of who they really are and what they need to be able to do the job, then it's my job as the manager, the leader, to be able to make that happen. I'm not there to do their job for them. I've never micromanaged anybody. If someone comes to work for me, I expect them to do the job. I'll let them make a mistake as long as they only make the mistake once. They don't make it twice. Generally speaking, that doesn't happen. But it's about my capability to get the best out of them, to give them what they need to work. So when I ran a restaurant in Harrogate, if my chef said he's having trouble mashing potatoes, then I go out and find him the best potato ricer I can get, because that makes him efficient. It takes a hell of a lot of pressure off him. It gets him to do what he's best at, which is making the best damn mashed potato the Yorkshire Meatball Company actually had.
Yeah, and I think there was just
Name drop in there, sorry.
and there was just one more question.
I was just thinking about why often people don't have that conversation, they don't listen. I work in mental health services, very briefly. I worked with a guy who told me his job, he got stressed because he needed this, this, and this at work, and nobody was listening. So I wrote a report saying exactly what he'd said. And his managers looked at this report and said, yes, we'll make those adjustments. Why didn't they just listen to him in the first place? He knew what he needed, but there's almost this sense of not trusting people, or
Yeah.
they're trying to
We
get
teach
away
management and leadership wrong in many respects. There aren't any pink sheets and set answers to this. So it's exactly why I said to the university we should get rid of MBAs. There's a place for scientific management and masters in this, that, and the other subject. But there's a place for if you like, an MA, where people start playing creatively with the knowledge they've got. And that's what's sadly missing in a lot of education. We're not teaching people to think with the information we give them as a resource. The whole way we're going, get me on another hobby. It's trying to rationalize everything, and you cannot do it when there's so much uncertainty around.
people are different.
It's sad for people now. There's even more uncertainty than ever. I'm great because I accepted a long time ago uncertainty is where I am. That's my strength. I can deal with it. And I deal with it because, like yourself, you do need routine. I came into my own when I became an officer in the Air Force. The structure and routine gave me the routine. It gave me the ability to explore and solve the problems that I was given without any fear of my feet not leaking. I didn't fly. I was only in the Air Force because the Navy turned me down. But yes, I've lost the track of the question. I hope I've answered it in some respect or other.
Any final comments our panel would like to make, or
Conversation. Talk to each
I
other.
find like form filling, because of like dyslexia and things like that, form filling and CVs, it's all done linguistically, like in writing, whereas I'm a visual thinker. If I could put one of my designs on a piece of paper and send that into an employer and have him or her look at the design rather than writing, trying to describe an image in writing. I find that'd be better.
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with you put it very well. Here on what you said is about a conversation. It's about opening up dialogue, and that dialogue not being one way but being two way. And I think that's really, really important, and that's exactly what it's about. And so, how do you get around issues of CVs? How do you get around issues of interviews? How do you get around those onboarding processes? Well, it's by having a conversation. It's by opening up a dialogue where someone can say, "Here are the things that are challenging for me," and in a context in which that is going to be accepted rather than being pushed away. And like you were saying about disclosure, that's a challenge. So knowing that environment is somewhere where that will be accepted, I think is key for that dialogue to be possible in a way which is productive, and in a way which then means people who have huge amounts to add, huge value to add to companies, to industry, to society, are able to do so. And it's about kind of creating those spaces. So should we give our panel a round of applause? Really insightful and helpful. That just nearly rounds up the rest of this session. I'll invite my panel to sit back and So it just leaves me to say thank you very much.